Hey board gamers, welcome to episode 23 of the Undiscovered Games video podcast, where we take a look at the lesser known board games of the world and share those with you. I haven't featured a Reiner Knizia game in a few episodes, so let's take a look at this gem from 2005 called King Arthur the Card Game. This is from Ravensburger for 2 to 5 players ages 8 and up. It plays in about 20 to 30 minutes. It's a very light card-based game with beautiful Camelot themed artwork, and I just love the overall aesthetics of the cards in this game. The box size and shape is very unique as well, but most importantly, the gameplay is silky smooth. It's got Reiner Knizia's fingerprints all over it. I like to call this a casual, cozy Knizia couch Camelot card game that anyone can play. I really like this game at all player counts. My only suggestion is if you're playing with just 2 players, definitely use the advanced variant. It's outlined very nice in the rulebook, and I will go over the advanced variant in this video today. But any other player count other than 2 players, you can decide which way you like better, with or without the variant. It just changes the game, it changes the flow a little bit in kind of an interesting way. This is the card game version of King Arthur the board game, which was also designed by Reiner Knizia. If you know anything about Knizia, a lot of times he'll design a board game and then he'll put out a card game version of that board game. Now sometimes the card game version is exactly like the board game pretty much. Other times, however, it is a completely standalone game with just some similar artwork and things like that. So I don't know where King Arthur the card game stands in comparison to the board game. I would love for anybody who has played the board game to comment below and let me know how this compares, because I've never been able to track the board game down. It's very obscure, out of print, hard to find, but the card game is much easier to find as of now, and it's rated much higher over on Board Game Geek. So we're going to focus on King Arthur the card game, and the concept here is very simple. You're going to have a hand of knight cards. You play knights to the table to defeat an enemy. Once you defeat an enemy, it goes into your hand, and then you can save up enemies to cash them in for these scoring cards up top. So it's a 3-step process essentially. You play knights to get enemies and play enemies to get points. I love how simple and smooth this game is. It'll take me very little time to teach it to you, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how it plays, and I'll continue to talk about it. To set up the game, you're going to find these 13 adventure cards. These are the horizontal cards with the big number at the top. You're going to place these face up on the table. All 13 of these get placed face up at the beginning. Then you're going to find there's 2 different sets of cards. We have the Adversaries here, and we have the Knight cards here. The Knights have the little helmet on the back, and the Adversary cards have the little shield on the back. Go ahead and shuffle the Knight deck and deal 4 cards out to each player. This is their starting hand. Make sure you keep your hand secret from the other players, but you can look at it. And then you're going to shuffle the Adversary cards, and you're going to start flipping these over one at a time to the table so everyone can see them. As you draw these, make sure you place the same colors into the same column. So all the blue cards would go into one column, all the red cards into a column, and so on. As soon as one column gets 4 cards of the same color, you're going to stop drawing, and that is the setup. You are now ready to play. Once you determine a start player, you're just going to take turns going clockwise around the table. Your turn consists of 4 steps. Now, you don't have to do every step, but you do have to do them in order, and you can only do each step once per turn. Step 1 is draw adversary cards. Step 2 is challenge an adversary. Step 3 is take an adventure card, and step 4 is draw a knight card. Let's talk about these steps in detail. So the first thing you have to decide on your turn is, do you want more enemies on the table? Now, you're not even allowed to do this if any of these columns are maxed out with 4 of the same color, but if all the columns have 3 or fewer cards of the same color, then you can do step 1, which is draw more adversary cards. The way you do this is exactly like we did during setup. You just take cards from this adversary deck here, flip one at a time, and place it in the matching column. As soon as one of the columns has 4 adversaries, you stop. The only rule here is once you commit to doing this, so once you start drawing, you have to keep drawing until one of the columns hits 4. But again, you do not have to do this step. Even if there's only one adversary on the table, you can skip this step and go right to step 2. Step 2 is challenge one adversary, and this is where you discard knights from your hand to defeat an adversary. The knight cards come in 3 colors. We have red, beige, and orange, and there's 2 denominations. We have 1 knight or 2 knights. Most of the cards in here are just 1 knight. We also have Merlin cards, which are wild. These can be paired up with any other knights, and they will be that color. color, or you can play a Merlin by itself as a knight of any color. To challenge an adversary, I just play knight cards from my hand and discard them, and that's where these numbers come into play. So the adversaries all have a number, 1, 2, 3, or 4. There is one level 5 adversary in the deck, but most of them are 1 through 4, and that just tells me how many matching knights I have to play from my hand to defeat this enemy. So let's say I wanted to go for this yellow 3. I would have to play 3 matching knights from my hand. So let's say I had 3 red knights here. I could group them together, and now I could take this level 3 yellow enemy. This adversary card goes into my hand, and then these knight cards that I played just get discarded to a face-up discard pile. It's worth noting that the knight colors have nothing to do with the enemy colors. Sometimes new players get a little confused. They might think that the red knights can only defeat red enemies, and that's not the case. The knights just have to match each other. So when you play knights together, you can't mix beige knights with red knights. You have to play all knights of the same color. I think of them as being part of the same army. But once you have your knights played, you can take any one of the enemy cards that you qualify for. So that's just something you want to reiterate to a new player if you're teaching them this game. And another thing I want to remind you is the Merlin card can be played with any knight. So I could play, 2 red knights and a Merlin, and that's like playing 3 red knights. You can also play Merlin by itself as 1 knight of any color. So I could just play Merlin and take a level 1 enemy. You're also allowed to overpay. So if there's only level 1 enemies out here and all I have is like a double knight, I could play this and take a level 1 enemy. I just don't get change for that leftover knight. So like I said, after you defeat your enemy, it goes into your hand and your knights get discarded. Now you proceed to step 3 of your turn, which is take 1 adventure card. This is where you look to see if you can qualify for one of these face-up scoring cards. Remember, we start the game with all 13 of these face-up. Each one of these cards has a different requirement. So if you notice here at the bottom left, that shows what you have to cash in to get this card. So for example, the green knight here requires me to cash in a level 3 and a level 4 enemy, and those can be of any color. It just has to be a 3 and a 4. Once I spend those enemies, they're discarded from the game, and now I get to take the green knight and put it face up in front of me, and this is worth 13 points at the end of the game. Nobody else can get this card now. This belongs to me, but it is worth noting that the adversaries you cash in for these cards are also worth points at the end if you haven't spent them. So if I had this 3 and this 4 in my hand at the end of the game, I'm going to get these points. That's going to be 7 points. But by cashing them in for this card, I essentially turned 7 points into 13 points. So I just upgraded my score. You have to consider this because some of these cards require specific colors and not values. Like this King Mark card here is worth 10 points at the end, and I have to cash in a green, a blue, and a yellow enemy, but those can be of any value. So ideally, I would want to cash in a level 1 of each of these colors, because that's like giving up 3 points to get this 10 points at the end. Whereas if I cash in, a level 4 green, a 4 blue, and a 4 yellow, I'm essentially giving up 12 points, but this is only worth 10 points. So that would not make sense usually. Now, sometimes in a very rare case, you might want to trigger the end of the game and give up some points to do that or something like that. But usually you're going to want to cash in your adversary cards to get more points from these scoring cards. The sea monster here requires 1 of each color enemy. The gold treasure says I have to discard 2 level 3 enemies or 1 level 5 enemy. This battle versus the Vikings just says I have to discard any 4 enemy cards. Same with this robber card here, just any 2 enemy cards. These 4 over here all work the same way. They have a specific number and color. So like the Fisher King here, I have to trade in green enemies totaling 6 or more. So I can combine like 2 level 3 green enemies or a level 4 and 2 level 1s. You can combine them however you want. You could even spend a 4 and a 4 and overpay for this. It's just you're giving up a couple points by doing that, but you can do that if you want to definitely get that card. And these other 3 work exactly the same. The questing beast here, you can trade in any number of red cards. They just have to total 8 or more. The royal tournament only requires 5 or more, but they have to be blue cards, and the Saxons card only needs 4, but they have to all be yellow cards. Finally, we have the Holy Grail, the Castle, and Excalibur. These all work the same. These are just values, but they can be any combination of colors or numbers. You just have to total the value showing here. So the Holy Grail, you can spend any combination of enemy cards as long as they total 12 or more, and that's going to get you 20 points. The Castle works the same way. You combine any amount of enemies as long as they total 9 or more, and Excalibur requires 5 or more. And that's how all the scoring cards work, and once again, that was step 3 of your turn. The last step of your turn is just draw 1 knight card back into your hand. You just draw from the face down stack. If this stack runs out, you just reshuffle all the discards. And it's worth noting there is no hand limit in this game, so you could save up as many knights as is possible and play a huge turn later. I really like that the game allows you to kind of pace yourself how you see fit. I also want to note that you can skip your turn to draw 2 knight cards instead. So after you've replenished the enemy cards at the beginning of your turn, you can decide if you want to skip the rest of your turn. You can just draw 2 knight cards, and that would be the end of your turn. Sometimes it makes sense to do that just to get more knight cards into your hand. Sometimes you have to do that, but you do get to see what enemies might come out first before you make that decision. But just remember, at the end of your turn, you always draw either 1 knight card or 2 knight cards back into your hand. That's your turn. Then it goes clockwise around the table to the player to your left, and you just keep going until one of 2 things happens. The game is going to end when there's only 1 scoring card left up here. So as soon as a player takes the second to last scoring card, then the game will end immediately. Another way the game can end is if a player takes the very last adversary card from the display here. So the whole deck has been emptied and there's only these face-up cards here. As soon as somebody takes that very last enemy, they finish their turn, and then we do end game scoring. So either 1 scoring card left or all the enemies are taken. That's how the game ends. The end game scoring is very simple. You add up all the points that are showing on these face-up adventure cards that you've collected, and then you add to that any adversary cards that are still left in your hand. They just get the points showing on them. So this here would be worth 6 points, for example, in my hand, plus all these points on these cards. Tally up your points. The player with the most points wins. If there's a tie, it's whoever had more knight cards left in their hand. They break the tie, and if it's still a tie, that is just a shared victory. And that's how you play King Arthur, the card game. Now, before I get into my final thoughts here, I do want to cover the expert variant, which uses these seal tokens. And all you're going to do at the beginning of the game is just give each player a stack of these tokens in their color. And these little tokens are going to change the pace and the flow of the game quite a bit. And with 2 players, I highly recommend using this variant. It seems like when you play this with 2 players, it's really easy to keep an eye on each other, almost too easy, and you can really tell what the other player is building up and going for. With these tokens in the game, it's going to allow you to hide your motives a little better, and you can be a little sneakier, and it also changes your strategy as far as which enemies to go for and when, and I really like that at 2 players. Now, at the higher player counts, I'm not sure if it's better with or without the variant. I can't really decide. I like things about both, and you can figure out on your own which one you prefer. Anyway, what do these seal tokens do? The game plays exactly the same as the basic game, except now, whenever you challenge an adversary, which is step 2 of your turn, where you play the knights and take an adversary card, now you don't get to take an adversary card right away. Now you have to place one of your seals on the adversary that you defeat. This basically claims that spot for you, so your opponents cannot take this adversary once you've placed your seal on it, but you don't get to take it right away into your hand. Instead, you have to wait until this entire column fills up with seals. So once there's a seal on every enemy in this column, then everybody immediately gets to take these enemy cards and put them in their hands. So as you can see, this adds a certain timing and pacing element to the game because it changes when you get to collect these enemies and then ultimately when you will get to spend them for these endgame scoring cards. It's a really subtle addition that adds so much depth here, and I really like this. Now, step 2 of your turn is going to come with 2 other options now when you play with this variant. So the normal step 2 is just play knights and place a token on the enemy that you're going to defeat. But instead of doing that, you can choose to attack an enemy that already has one of your seals on it from a previous turn. So let's say this column out here, I really want this yellow 3. I already put one of my seals on it from a previous turn. Now this turn, I could play 3 more knights and take this card card directly into my hand and not have to wait for all these to fill up with seals. So it's a way to get these cards into your hand faster than your opponents, but you have to pay knights once again. So you had to pay knights to put your seal out, then you had to pay more knights to get it into your hand. Finally, if you want to go even quicker, you can just go ahead and fight an enemy. If the enemy has no seals on it, you can fight it and just pay double the knights and take it right away. So again, if this yellow 3 was out here and I really wanted that right now so I could score one of these cards, I could just go ahead and play 6 knights and take it right away and not even put a seal on it. So there you have 3 options on step 2 of your turn. It's also worth noting that if a column only has 1 enemy card in it, then you're going to get that right away just by playing the normal number of knights. So if this blue column only had 1 enemy in it, say it had this level 2 enemy, on my turn, I play 2 knights, I put my seal on this card. Well, now every card in this column has a seal on it, so I get it right away. So these are some great subtle decisions you have to weigh now once you play with this expert variant, and I really like the way this changes the game up. I just love how the whole pacing is affected by this. It's all about when you go for certain enemies now. Sometimes you'll go for an enemy just to trigger that whole row so you can get these cards into your hand, and then all of a sudden you can qualify for like a huge scoring card and your opponent didn't see that coming. And that's why I love this variant with 2 players, because you can sort of hide your motives a little better. It's not as easy to keep track of each other, and it's harder to detect when your opponent is going to qualify for certain scoring cards and things like that. So I really like the variant with 2 players. Now let's get into my final thoughts overall on King Arthur the card game. Now I'm going to separate my ratings here on this as a card game versus as a board game amongst all the variety of games in my collection. So as a card game goes, this is a 10 out of 10 for me. I have no issues with this game. To me, this is everything I want in a card game. It plays fast, it's super easy to learn and teach. All types of gamers can get into it. The artwork looks great. It's got a theme that's easy to understand. Everybody loves the King Arthur Camelot theming, so that's something you can kind of use to teach the game. You just use knights to defeat enemies, use enemies to get points. It's such a smooth, simple idea. The turns are quick. There's not a lot of downtime. There's not a lot of analysis paralysis going on here. I mean, there's some deep decisions, but nothing that's going to just drag the game along. The pace is just so quick. I love how quick it plays. Obviously, you're going to have card gamey stuff going on here, like luck of the draw, not a huge impressive table presence and things like that. But I love how portable this is. But the box is big enough where it does stand out on the shelf a little bit. Sometimes those little card games, the boxes are so tiny that you kind of forget you even have them. But it's small enough where it's not going to take up a ton of space in the game bag, so you can always bring this along to a game night. If you have 20 or 30 minutes at the beginning or the end of the night, it just fits that niche perfectly, especially because it's a Reiner Knizia game that most people have never played or even heard of before. So it's a great conversation piece too. So high marks from me as a card game. Now let's talk about it quickly as a board game. This would be a filler game, not something I'm going to always reach for or play every night. Not something that's going to burn my brain that much. It's not like this super intense, awesome gaming experience, but it's smooth, it's enjoyable, it's pleasant. So for that, I give it an 8 out of 10 when I compare it to other board games. The turns are so quick. That's what I like about the game. There's just not much downtime. But again, the decisions aren't super deep. If you add those seal tokens to the game, that does complicate things a little bit. It feels a little heavier with those in the game, but it's still a very simple, straightforward card game. I do like that it plays up to 5 players. That's great for a filler game. I do have a couple minor gripes on the graphic design choice here. On these scoring cards at the bottom left, these are neutral colors and this is yellow. They look very, very similar. So when I set up these scoring cards, I like to group these by the type that they are. So these cards over here all require specific colors. These cards over here are neutral. They can be any colors or numbers combined. It's just kind of annoying that this color looks so much like yellow. You really have to reiterate that to a new player. And along those same lines, I don't know why they have red knights and red enemies. That confuses players because they think that the red knights have to be used to defeat red enemies. The knights should have been 3 completely different colors from the enemy cards. That would have made more sense, but you just have to reiterate, you just play matching knights. They don't have to match the enemies, they just have to match each other because they're from the same army. Once you get that through to people, you'll find that this is a very simple game to teach, and everybody at the table is probably going to enjoy it. King Arthur the card game, high marks from me. Check it out, especially if you like Reiner Knizia. So have you ever played this? Let me know in the comments below. And also, have you ever played King Arthur the board game? Where are all the people that have played King Arthur the board game? I can't find anything about that on the internet, so I would love to know more about the board game version of this and how it compares to this card game. My thoughts are that this card game is probably the better edition just based on the Board Game Geek ratings, but I'm just curious about the board game. So let me know in the comments if you've ever come across that board game, and also what is your favorite Reiner Knizia card game implementation of one of his board games. And anything else you want to talk about, drop it in the comments below. I really enjoy reading all your comments and discussing these lesser known board games with the board game community out there. It's just such a fun time to talk about this great hobby with all of you, and I'm happy to do that on a daily basis. So hit me up over on Instagram as well at undiscovered_games, and right here on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. That really helps my channel grow, and as long as my subscribers are going up, I'm going to continue to post regular video reviews like this. If you want to support the channel farther, there is a donate link in the description below. It's just a PayPal link. You can donate any amount you like. It's like a digital tip jar if you feel so inclined. I don't expect that whatsoever. The best way you can help the channel is to click the subscribe button. Thanks again for watching, everybody. I got another great undiscovered game to share with you on the next episode, so make sure you stay tuned for that. See you next time on the Undiscovered Games video podcast.